The days are longer, the calendar is filling up, and I want to feel as good as this beautiful summer weather. That's why I've been loving Groons. It's one daily pack of gummies that covers my greens, vitamins, and minerals, and even has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, so I don't need to juggle a complicated wellness routine on top of everything else. They taste amazing. They're easy to toss in my bag on the go. Plus, they're vegan, gluten-free, and HSA, FSA eligible for reimbursement. Save up to 52% off with promo code podcast at Gruns.co. That's code podcast at GRUNS.co.
It's the Go Gopher Podcast with Mike Grimm, episode number 2. I am Mike Grimm, voice of the Golden Gophers, and welcome back. If you listened to episode 1, we thank you for that. If you're listening now for the first time, we also thank you for that. I'd invite you to subscribe to the Go Gopher Podcast, as we'll bring you compelling and entertaining Gopher content each week, and we appreciate that as well. Our podcast is sponsored by State Farm agent Tony Hoagland at ChamplinInsurance.com. A big thank you to Tony for supporting our podcast. He's a big Gopher fan, and we appreciate that. Tony Hoagland at ChamplinInsurance.com. Last week, we had Ben Johnson and Spencer Tollickson on episode 1 talking hoops. This week, we'll continue talking hoops. I'm welcoming Gopher Athletic Director Mark Coyle to the podcast for the first time. We'll talk about his relatively new role as a member of the NCAA Men's Basketball Committee. We'll also talk football, we'll have some fun as well, and talk about fit. Our conversation with Mark Coyle on the Go Gopher Podcast is next. But first, here's a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Gopher fans, this is your State Farm agent, Tony Hoagland. We are super excited to be part of the new Mike Grimm Show on Talk North. For the year of 2022, we will be donating $10 to the University of Minnesota Children's Masonics Hospital for everyone that calls our office or checks in with us online and mentions that they heard about us on Talk North and the Mike Grimm Show. We are really excited again that Mike came on board with Talk North. You can reach us at 763-421-4900. You can find us on the web at ChamplinInsurance.com. Again, 763-421-4900, or find us on the web at ChamplinInsurance.com. Roll the boat, Sky Yuma, Go Gophers.
It's episode 2 of the Go Gopher Podcast, and we're thrilled to have joining us the athletic director at the University of Minnesota, Mark Coyle, to talk about all kinds of things. But first of all, welcome to the show. We're glad you're a part of it, and you're guest 1 on episode 2.
Hey, well, Mike, appreciate everything you do for our program and for our student athletes as a voice for our program. Of course, everybody knows who you are, and honored to have an opportunity to visit with you about the great things that our student athletes and coaches are doing here at Minnesota.
Yeah, so many great stories to tell. There's no doubt about that, and we'll get to a few of those. But I did want to ask you first, you're a member now for the first time as the Golden Gopher Athletic Director of the NCAA Men's Basketball Tournament Committee. Kind of take us through, first of all, how one goes about getting selected to be on that committee and what the process was there, and how much you're maybe looking forward to this process, which I know will consume some of your time.
Yeah, well, first off, I'm incredibly humbled, obviously, as you know, Mike, to represent the University of Minnesota in the Big Ten Conference on the Men's Basketball Committee. As you know, March Madness is such a staple of our society and such a exciting time for college athletics with the men's and women's basketball tournaments taking place and culminating with the Final Four. And so I was really honored when I was approached by Commissioner Warren of the Big Ten Conference. So if you remember, Jim Phillips was the athletic director at Northwestern, and Jim was recently named the commissioner of the Atlantic Coast Conference about a year ago. And so he was not able to finish up his term on the basketball committee. And so the Big Ten Conference approached me and asked me if I would have an interest doing that. And of course, very excited about the opportunity. So I was able to step in and take over Jim's appointment. The committee has 12 members. The Autonomy 5 conferences each have a representative. So I'm the representative from the Big Ten Conference. And it's been a great learning experience. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of new committee members who I did not know before. So it's great to spend time with them, learn about them, and really do a deep dive into college basketball and learn about the many great coaches out there, the student athletes in the different programs, and the great accomplishments that they're achieving. It's been a really good learning experience for me.
And of course, over your time, you have been at some places that have been pretty good in basketball, thinking Kentucky and Syracuse. In fact, fact, the time you were in Syracuse, I think both the men and women made the Final Four in your time there. So obviously, I'm guessing that was part of what the committee liked, that you have been around basketball. And I know with the Gophers, there have been some successes in your time here as well. And we're going to talk about that and in terms of those things. But how much of that background, one, helped you maybe be invited here, and two, can help you as you're a member giving input to this committee?
Yeah, well, where there's no doubt, my time at Kentucky, I spent, almost 7 years at Kentucky and then my year at Syracuse before I had the chance to come back home to Minnesota. Those were great learning experiences. And there's no doubt, when I was hired at Boise State, my first athletic director job, I remember the president who hired me out there, talked about Boise State's strong football tradition, right? You talk about Boise State, the blue turf and the football success, and they were really trying to get basketball going on the men's and women's side. And we had great success out there during my time there, and they've had continued success. So there's no doubt that experience at Kentucky, at Syracuse, at Boise State, here at Minnesota has given me a really good background to be a valuable member of that committee.
So I think diehard fans have a pretty general idea of what that committee is about. At the end of the day, I suppose it is the simple task, and it may be not that simple, of coming up with a field of 68, right, when March Madness rolls around. But so much more goes into it. Kind of take us through now as you're learning this process, how many times you meet. I suppose you're now having to watch more basketball than maybe you ever have, knowing that you're going to have input on all kinds of different teams.
Yeah, well, for you college basketball lovers, definitely try to get on this committee because you have to watch college basketball. What a chore that is, right? But you're exactly right. That's been the biggest uptick, to be honest with you. Obviously, I follow all of our programs and all the great things our student athletes are doing, but I'm also watching a lot of different conference games across the country, different teams, trying to get a feel for them and what makes them tick and so forth. And again, it's been an awesome experience. I was named to the committee last spring. We probably have, 1 or 2, 3 calls a month, either Zoom calls or our regular calls. We actually have our first in-person meetings coming up next weekend in Indianapolis around the NCAA convention. So that'll be an exciting time to spend time with them. Fortunately, I know all the committee members, previously I've had a chance to kind of work with them and spend time with them. So that's nice to interact with them again. But it's been a great learning experience. And how I kind of describe it, there's 68 teams, obviously, in the men's tournament field, and 32 of those are automatic qualifiers. So, for example, in the Big Ten Conference, whoever wins the Big Ten basketball tournament in Indianapolis gets that automatic bid to the NCAA tournament. And then you have 36 at-large teams. And so our job as a committee is to try to find the best 36 at-large teams to go with those 32 automatic qualifiers to create a very talented, field. And I have to give credit to Dan Gavitt and Joanne Scott with the NCAA. They do a lot of work. Tammy Lee with the NCAA have been awesome to spend time with them and learn about, to get me up to speed as a first-time member of that committee. So it's a lot of work, but it's very exciting, and it's stuff I love to do. Again, I'm forced to watch college basketball, which isn't a bad job.
Yeah, real tough work if you can get it, right? No doubt.
No doubt.
And I suppose even when you get it really down to the crux of it, it's not just the 68, as you mentioned, 32 get in automatically, and then there's 36, I guess, at large. And I suppose there's probably 25 that are no-brainers, right? Anybody could pick out, hey, those are in. So I suppose it then becomes you pick 10 or 11 out of maybe 25 or 30. And all these months of work probably comes down to just about that. And then at the end, it might be pick 3 out of 6, right?
Yeah, it obviously gets very challenging as you work your way down through the number of teams, and obviously I have not gone through the selection process before, and so I'm looking forward to having that opportunity to go through with this committee, and again the guidance from the NCAA. But you're exactly right, Mike. I mean, the amount of depth when we watch games on TV, I pay attention to the net rankings, the RPI, the KenPom. I'm paying attention to all the stuff that you pay attention to as our play-by-play person for the Gophers and in our basketball program, and so again it's diving into those statistics and making sure you have a good understanding. And I can tell you, how much it means for a team to get to March Madness. Our time. Remember, we were in Des Moines a couple of years ago. What that meant to our program, to our fan base, the excitement. And so I take the work very seriously because for these programs to have that opportunity to get to March Madness is a huge step, not only for your basketball program but for your institution. So as a committee member, you want to make sure you do your homework. You have a clear understanding of the teams and what they're doing throughout the entire season, how they're playing, et cetera. So it's a great responsibility, but something I really enjoy being a part of so far.
Well, and share what you can about this. I don't know how secretive it has to be or not, so if you can't answer, let me know. But are there things like, so you represent the Big Ten. Is that with the expectation that you'll be an advocate for the Big Ten? Like you'll be in that room saying, hey, look, Ohio State, I know they're bubble. I'm just throwing out a team, but, Ohio State's a bubble team. I think they should get in. Or is it the other way where if there's Big Ten teams involved, you have to remove yourself from the conversation?
Yeah, Mike, I've not actually been in the room through the selection process, but my understanding, Mike, is that when you talk about the University of Minnesota, I'm not allowed to be in the room. Or, for example, there's conference commissioners who are on this committee with me. And when you talk about teams and their conference, she or he will need to excuse themselves from the room. But my understanding is I can talk about the Big Ten Conference. I can talk about the Northeast Conference. I can talk about the Atlantic 10, the Southland, all those conferences. I can be a part of those conversations. But if we're having conversations about Minnesota, my understanding is that I'm not in the room during those conversations.
So it could be, I suppose, and you'll find out, I suppose, as you get closer to March, that you may have a friend in the Big Ten as an athletic director, or maybe a men's coach who is a bubble guy, and will say, hey, when you're in there, you gotta put in a word for us here. Push for the. I suppose there's lobbying in all walks of life, right? And this would be one.
Yeah, and each conference does a phenomenal job of providing information to the NCAA and to the committee members. So we have an opportunity to, as you read the like Michelle Train, who's our media relations person, who does such a great job getting game notes to you and Spencer and to all of our media and so forth. Well, the conferences have members who do that for them as well. So I can read about the Big Ten Conference, I can read about the Southeastern Conference, et cetera. So we get that data as well, which is very helpful when you go through the process.
And then are you, it's hard, you got 300 plus teams to really, kind of burrow through, so to speak. Do you have a specific assignment like upper Midwest teams or East Coast, or is it, hey, watch all 300 plus and come to the table?
Yeah, well, we all work with different conferences, which is helpful, but ultimately you need to pay attention to all the conferences, right? Because when there's 12 of you who are trying to, again, not only identify the at-large teams, but then you've got to seed and bracket the tournament, right? And they've got obviously guidelines on how you seed and how you bracket, so forth. So when I go into year one, I'm trying to have this wide focus of all the conferences, all the games, pay attention to them. Obviously, I have the conferences that I work closely with to pay attention to those. But also when I have a chance to be with my fellow committee members as they provide updates, to make sure I take good notes and have a really good understanding of what's taking place across all the conferences. Because again, it's such a big moment for institutions, and I want to make sure that I give great effort and I represent all the programs the right way.
And then one more follow-up on this. You mentioned Jim Phillips was part of this, and I'm sure you have other colleagues that have been on this before who maybe don't. I think of even like a Gary Barta from Iowa who was on the football, kind of a similar thing. Do you pick their brain just in general of an approach? Like, hey, do you have some tips on what the best approach is as we get closer to March?
No doubt, Mike. That's a great question. In fact, the NCAA, when I talk about Dan and Joanne, they encourage that. And so I've had conversations with Commissioner Phillips. I've had conversations with Mike Babinski, who served on the committee, the athletic director at Purdue. Mitch Barnhart, as you know, Mitch is my closest guy. And he and I, we had a conversation. Actually, I was driving up to Forest Lake for a basketball game for our son. And I have a 30-minute conversation with Mitch on what are some of the metrics he looked at when he got in the room. And so, yeah, you definitely have those conversations. And it's very helpful. And again, as you know, there's such a close-knit bond between the athletic directors, the conference commissioners, et cetera. So I'm just very grateful for the input I've gotten from others. Jamie Pollard at Iowa State has been awesome to me. Jamie's on the committee, so I've had a chance to talk to him about some of the things that he looks at. So again, we've got a great network of people, and you just have those conversations, and all of it helps you as you get ready to get in the room.
And then as you accumulate info as we get closer to, do you have maybe some people on the staff at Minnesota who might be helping you, gather some info, so that you have a broad base of knowledge when you do enter that room?
I call them my secret weapons. I've got a group of people, 3 or 4 people here who are working closely with me. And again, the NCAA encourages that you have other people kind of work with you to make sure you're tracking as you look at different teams across the country to make sure you have the latest information. So we've got a group of people here that I'm working with, and they've been awesome. And we've got to come up with a cool code name for them, but they've been very helpful to me, which has been very appreciative of that.
Yeah, because it's a busy time. Let's face it. You want to, go to events, you've got, basketball, you've got hockey, swimming, the whole deal. I know on occasion you like to even, go on the road trip with a team just to hunker with them and find out what the culture's like and all of that. So you throw this on top of it, and it takes, as they say, it takes a village, I suppose, to get ultimately get to the goal.
Yeah, no doubt. And Mike, you're close enough to our program. You see us every day. One of the things I love about Minnesota is we've got such great people that we work with, and obviously you're part of that group, and you see what it's like day in and day out. And I'm just so grateful for the staff we have, because obviously anytime you serve on an NCAA committee, whether it be basketball, baseball, softball, soccer, whatever that committee is, it's a lot of work. And again, just really grateful for the staff that we have. And my goal is, I try to be at all of our events when I'm in town, and I like to travel on the road with our teams to get to know our student athletes, our coaches, and as you said, hunker down with them and really get a good vibe of what's going on in the programs. So there's no doubt it's a busy time, but we've got great staff, and there's no doubt we'll continue to do this the right way.
One more on this. Is this committee that you're on, does it have in any way, shape, or form have a say over future host cities and destinations, or is that something completely separate? Because I know a lot of Gopher fans and a lot of people in Minnesota would love to get a Final Four back here. It was so fun to see it at US Bank Stadium, and first round games, second round games, what have you, maybe at the Target Center or XL or wherever it might be.
Yeah, so this committee is part of that process. They obviously work closely with the NCAA. The NCAA will put out those bids, and schools can have an opportunity to respond. And as you know, Minnesota, we have a strong history of hosting NCAA championship events. We've got the women's Final Four here this year, which is exciting. So yeah, we are definitely a part of that. And I can tell you at Minnesota, we're very excited about those opportunities and continue to be very aggressive in trying to host those NCAA championship events.
Very good. Well, that was a fun basketball discussion. I know that you'll be busy, but I know that you're going to take this on and certainly enjoy following all kinds of teams. The one team I know you're following very closely is the one right there in your own building, the University of Minnesota men's basketball team. As we talk for this podcast right now, the Gophers sitting with 10 wins. They've been very, very competitive, had that heartbreaker against Michigan State on Wednesday of this past week. Took them right down to the wire, the 9th-ranked team in the country. So before we get into, I want to go back a little bit and ask you kind of how the hiring process went last spring. We had Ben Johnson on last week, and he was awesome with kind of how he explained that 7-day stretch of, and I'm sure for you it was even busier. But first, just a general kind of state of the program. How happy are you right now with how things have gone here through, I guess, the first 1/3 of the season?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt. We're just so grateful for Ben. I made the comment, Mike, at the press conference. I'm just so grateful that Ben believed in us. And I get that he's a Gopher. He went to school here. He played here, all those type of things. But, it takes two people. And what I mean by that is you need somebody who believes in you and what you're trying to do. And Ben believed in our vision when he had a chance to sit down with me and with President Gable and our search committee. He did such an awesome job outlining what this place meant to him and where he wanted to take it. And again, when you hire a coach, you have no idea how it's going to turn out. You really don't. You hopeful that's going to work. You're hopeful that everything falls into place. And I feel really, really good with Ben and what he's doing. And we feel really comfortable. And I'll never forget when we offered him the job, his response on the phone was something I will never forget. It's going to be one of the greatest joys of my life and something I'll always remember. And again, we're going to do everything we can to support him. But I just am absolutely thrilled for the effort he's putting together. His coaching staff is doing a phenomenal job. And then our student athletes. I mean, he has basically rebuilt that entire team. And those kids have come in. They have bought into Minnesota. They bought into what he's doing. And again, they deserve a lot of credit too, because they're doing everything the right way. And we're very competitive. We have our chances. We have opportunities in front of us. And there's no doubt we'll continue to do the right things the right way.
You've always talked, and you and I have talked about this in the past on different shows and different interviews, that, and all ADs, I think, do this, where they have, if it's not a written list, at least a mental list. Like if this job ever opens, if this coach has to leave, if you have to, are into a position where you have to make a decision to move on from a coach, and that's the life of college athletics, and it happens, that you have a list, either mentally or maybe in your desk drawer or what have you. And take me through kind of how that evolves. The list, I suppose, changes every year depending on where somebody you had in mind went. Maybe they had a bad year, whatever it is. And where was Ben on the list, and kind of why was he on that list as you were getting ready to make the change?
Yeah, well, again, another great question. And you're exactly right. I mean, I do keep lists for all of our sports, for every program, and a lot of ADs do that across the country. So it's not a Mark Coyle novel idea. I mean, you've heard this for years, that people have these lists. They try to be prepared because you never know. And especially in today's world where things are changing so quickly and the movement that's happening with coaches, with student athletes, et cetera, I feel like you've always got to be prepared. And I feel like, I had great experience when I was at Kentucky. I had a chance to do 2 basketball searches. I wasn't inside the room, but I was close enough where I could see how they were done and how Mitch handled them. And so that was great experience for me when I had a chance to do it my first time at Boise State, then at Syracuse, and now here at Minnesota. And I can tell you, with Ben, I've been very blessed in terms of Mike, working at Kentucky, working at Syracuse. I worked for a company called Host Communications. And when I worked for Host Communications, we did the basketball game programs for the Final Fours for the women's and the men's. And I was able to meet a lot of different coaches, a lot of different administrators. And so I feel like when we do have openings, I've been very fortunate that I can reach out to people who I've known for a long time, who I trust, and I can tell you, as soon as we had our opening here with our basketball program, 2 of the first people who were in my office were Jeremiah Carter and JT Brewitt, and they're like, look at Ben Johnson, from Ben's time as a student athlete, from Ben's time as an assistant coach here, and I literally pulled out my list. I said, there he is. He's on that list, like he's there, right? And so, those are 2 great resources I used. I had a chance to talk to Coach Calipari. Coach Calipari and I keep in contact. He's always so gracious to me with his time. And, we were at Kentucky together for almost 3 years. And anytime I reach out to him, he always responds. We always connect, which is phenomenal. Coach Boeheim has been phenomenal to me. I can talk to him. Coach Rice at Boise State, who's had a lot of success at Boise State. He came to Boise State from Gonzaga. He was the number 2 coach at Gonzaga. So, I can talk to coaches who I trust, who I know. I can talk to athletic directors. Gene Smith at Ohio State. I can't tell you how gracious he is with his time with me. Gary Bard at Iowa, somebody who I have a lot of respect for. So I can talk to these different coaches, these different ADs to get names, to get ideals, et cetera. And there's no doubt that Ben was on that list. And I can tell you, Mike, and I've made this comment to you before, I have done head coaches searches. I think we've hired 12 or 13 coaches here in Minnesota. We've hired coaches at Boise State and Syracuse. And this men's basketball search at Minnesota was the most competitive search I have ever been a part of. We had a very deep and talented pool of coaches that wanted to come here, and Ben earned that job. I mean, how he presented himself when he talked to the search committee, how he presented himself when he came to our house and visited with me and President Gable, Julie Manning, Dusty Clemson, Jeremiah Carter. I mean, he won that job, and he did a phenomenal job. And that's why we're not surprised by the success he's having, because he went out, a very competitive, deep, and talented searching pool that we were looking at, and he stood apart, and we're just so grateful that he's here leading our program right now.
Well, and he was on the podcast last week, and he said he thought for him the key was getting the in face, that he was, in fact, he told a story, I thought it was awesome. He was on his way, he was in Cincinnati, obviously at Xavier, and he's driving on, I think he said, a Saturday morning to the gym to get a workout in, and Julie Manning, your deputy, called and said, hey, can you be on a flight in like 2 hours? We want to do it in person. And he said he turned around, he knew that would be the moment of truth. And he's like, he goes, it was easy. I'm passionate about the place, and it was different than interviewing for some of the other jobs, and there's always about a fit. Would you, and maybe you don't want to give away all the secrets of everything, but would you say that was the key, to get him on campus and then face-to-face and let him do his thing?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Mike, because of COVID, and I know we're all tired of talking about COVID, but because of COVID, our search committee, and we had a great search committee from Francis Holman's, our faculty athletic rep, Quincy Lewis was part of that. I've talked about Jeremiah, Julie, Dusty, Tim McCleary, Tricia Butke. I know I'm missing a few. Peyton Owens was part of that group. We had a really good search committee. And so we did Zooms, and as you know, I like to move very quickly because I like to get resolution for our student athletes and for recruiting. So we set up, a handful, maybe 9 to 10 Zoom interviews with our candidates right away. And Ben did a wonderful job in that Zoom interview. And then once we narrowed it down and we wanted to bring in a handful into St. Paul so I could meet with them at my house with President Gable, because I feel it's important for our candidates to sit down with our president. And, she is so good at leading this institution. She's so good about recognizing the value of athletics and how it's the front porch of the institution. And for her to make time to sit down with our candidates was phenomenal. And I remember when we did our Zoom interview with Ben, he's sitting there with an Xavier pullover on. In my mind, I'm like, what the world's going on, man? Like, he's a Gopher, right? Because I'm used to him being at Minnesota, playing here, being an assistant coach. And then when he came into town, I'll never forget it. We interviewed him on a Sunday morning. I mean, he had no time to get ready for this. And we interviewed him early on a Sunday morning. And he showed up at our house in St. Paul, and he's got on a Gopher pullover. And I remember making a comment to him like, man, that pullover looks so much better on you than that Navy one did or whatever. And he laughed and had a good time. And you're right, because he was here, he played here, he had so much passion that came across. But, one thing that really stuck out to me about Ben, and it's amazing, Mike, it's these little things that you go through on these searches. When, Ben had a chance to meet my family. And as you know, we've got our daughter, Gracie, who's a sophomore here at the U. And then we've got our son, Nicholas, and then Benjamin, who are over at Cretin-Durham Hall. And when Ben was leaving our house, he said goodbye to my kids, and he remembered their names. And our daughter, Gracie, you spent time with Gracie. Yeah. Gracie's very, she's an old soul. She just gets it. And she's like, Dad, he's the only one that remembered my name. How cool. I mean, that stood out, right? And it's little things like that. And not that the other coaches, didn't know their names or whatever, but he made a point to say goodbye to Grace, goodbye to Nicholas, goodbye to Benjamin, goodbye to Kristen. And that goes a long way. I mean, it's those little things, right, that kind of separated out a little bit. And he did that. So.
Absolutely, no question about it. So as as you get through, you're through the process. You pull the trigger. He's the guy. He's excited. You're excited. Now you're seeing some results. There's recruiting victories now as well locally, which was part of, I think, what made Ben a candidate anyway, right? I mean, that's important to you. And in many of the hires you've made, when you think about it, Lindsey Whalen's a grad. Ben Johnson's a graduate. Bob Motzko was here for a time as an assistant and as a student athlete before, he ended up at St. Cloud State. So there's some that's important to you.
Yeah, no, what I've learned is, and again, if you go back to press conference day one when Mark Coyle was hired, either right or wrong, I feel like Minnesota should be a destination. I think we are a type of program. There's no reason why we can't compete at a high level in all of our sports. And I want people who see this as a destination. I shared with you the day I was hired, and you and I have talked about this, Mike, on the record, off the record. I see Minnesota as a destination. Like, this is where we want to be. And I want coaches who want to be here. And if you look at our coaches, I think, Mike, I might be off. We might have 9 or 10 of our head coaches are graduates of Minnesota. And what we've learned is, it's a destination job for them. And I think of Erin Chastain, our soccer coach. She would be somebody great that you should talk to on this podcast. What she's done with our soccer program, her energy, her excitement, and who she is. She's a graduate. She played here. She's from here. She's been phenomenal. Coach Motzko, who's here for a couple of years left. This is his dream job, his destination. Ben Johnson, his dream job, his destination. PJ Fleck, who didn't go to school here. Well, PJ talked to me about how his dream was to be a head coach in the Big Ten. Minnesota's in the Big Ten. It's a dream job, right? So if you find those type of people, I think you're going to have great success. And again, what I love about Ben and what I love about all the coaches that we have in place, they don't make excuses. This is Minnesota. We're in the Big Ten. We're in a great conference. It snows here. We figure it out. We do things the right way. And academically, we're the highest rated public school. Athletically, we finish in the top 20. So there's a lot of great things going on because of our great coaches and the great student athletes that they're bringing here to Minnesota.
In essence, it sounds like people and fit might be what you value, if not the most. It's near the top. Where did you learn maybe that lesson as you go through the hiring process?
I think it was 2004. Kentucky played Marquette in the men's Midwest Regional Basketball NCAA Tournament Regional at the Metrodome. Mm-hmm. And I was the director of marketing at the Minnesota at the time. And Mark Ryan, our senior social athletics director, was running that tournament, and I volunteered to help out. And I had an opportunity to work with Kentucky, and that's how I had a chance to spend time with Mitch Barnhart and get to know him a little bit. And then I ended up going to Kentucky about a year later. And when Mitch hired me, he hired me for his director of development job. Mike, I had zero fundraising experience. I had never asked anybody for a dime. Right. And Mitch says, I want you to come down and be over our fundraising. And I remember, Mitch, I've never done this. I'm not sure. And he's like, you're going to be fine because you have a good heart and you do things the right way. And so that lesson has taught me more in terms of, if you look at John Cunningham, you remember John Cunningham, who was our deputy AD here, who's now the AD at Cincinnati, and they're having great success. When I met John Cunningham when I was hired at Boise State, he was the head of our compliance department. He had nothing to do with external affairs. He had nothing to do with being an athletic director. And as I worked with John, John explained to me that his dream was to be an AD one day, and I made him our deputy athletics director at Boise, then at Syracuse, and now at Minnesota. Now he's an AD at Cincinnati. And what I learned about is if you find people, that have great work ethic, that have great heart, and that fits your situation. And I'm not sure any of us can define fit, but how I define fit is simply this: low ego, high output. And I steal that from Chris Peterson. Chris Peterson, when he was at Boise State, he used to talk all the time about how do you surround yourselves with people who have low ego, high output. And Mike, again, you're part of our program every day. You see it every day. I mean, think about our coaches. Do they not exhibit low ego, high output? And again, whether you're talking about PJ, you're talking about Caitlin Thompson, our women's tennis coach, the coaches we brought in, they want to serve and help others. It's not about them. It's about the student athletes. It's about the institution. It's about the program. And so I think when you can find coaches who embrace the institution and the program, that's going to serve you well. And I'll end with this. Jeremy Foley, who was a longtime athletic director at Florida, he's the AD emeritus at Florida now. Jeremy, when I was at Kentucky, he was always so gracious with his time with me, and I had a chance to pick his brain a lot. And Jeremy taught me a lesson early on. He said, Mark, you always have to make the best decision for your institution. If you make the best decision for your institution, things will fall into place. And I would argue, if you look at the coaches we've hired, if you look at the staff that we've brought into our program, the type of student athletes that we bring in the people that are the right fit for our campus academically, athletically, and socially. And I think if you do those things, you'll have success on the coaching side.
Well, and now back to the PJ Fleck side of it. As you mentioned, he's the one of the guys that really had and he's even said, I wasn't in Minnesota very often, didn't know much about Minnesota, but wanted to be a head coach in the Big Ten. You had, I think, previously talked with him when you were at Syracuse about that. It wasn't the right fit then. It became the right fit, and now it's to the point where it sounds like I think PJ Fleck probably turned some opportunities to maybe discuss other jobs last year with his success down to stay, and you offered him a contract extension, and in the middle of the season decided that was the right time. And as it turns out, now you've got the Axe, you've got a 9-win season, 3 straight bowl wins for him, 5 for the program. It's in pretty good shape.
Yeah, well, first off, again, I go back to President Gable, and it's so important that you have alignment with your board and with your president. And for her and our board to be supportive of doing these contract extensions for PJ during the season. We didn't have 9 wins when we did the contract. We didn't have the win over Wisconsin when we did the contract, right? But we just felt like what he's brought, what he and Heather, I joke with his wife, Heather, because as you know, she's so visible with our program. They're the ultimate change agents. And if you go back to when we hired PJ, I just felt like we needed to shake the tree. We needed something different. And there's no doubt he is different. I mean, as you know, Mike, he goes 24/7. Energy, excited. It's all about the culture. It's all about doing things the right way. And I think, there's a reason why we have our highest grade point average we've ever had with our football program. There's a reason why we've won 3 straight bowl games under his direction. There's a reason why we've had the most wins since 1904. I mean, because he does things the right way. And there is no doubt every year schools are going to call PJ Fleck. What he's accomplishing, I mean, look at his staff right now, how, we've had 3 staff members who all have left for better jobs in terms of promotions, to be defensive coordinators, passing game coordinators, et cetera. That's a reflection of PJ and what he's building here. And again, we're just grateful for what he's doing, what Heather does. And again, they're our ultimate change agents. But again, PJ wants to be here. He loves it here. And it's our goal to make sure we continue to provide him with the resources he needs to keep us relevant in the Big Ten on a national scale.
What is your vision for where the program can go?
I don't want to make anybody mad, but I have a ton of respect for Wisconsin. I have a ton of respect for Iowa and what they've done and how they've done it for a long, long time. And there's no reason why we can't compete at a high level at Minnesota. And you've heard me say this before. I remember when I was hired, I made it very clear that I did not come here to be 500. Right. I want to win at a high level, and I want all of our teams to compete at a high level. And I clearly understand we have not been to the Rose Bowl for a long time. I clearly understand we've not won the men's Big Ten basketball tournament for a long time. In my mind, Mike, there is no reason why we can't do it. And I feel like we've got the right coaches, the right people here. If you look at our volleyball program, what they do on a national scale, you look at our women's hockey, our men's hockey, you look at our women's gymnastics program, what Coach Hansen does, Coach Anderson, the all-time winningest baseball baseball coach, Coach Ritter and softball program, what they do. There's no reason why we can't compete in all of our sports. And so it's my job as the athletic director to make sure we give the resources, again, academically, athletically, socially, to help our kids and our programs achieve those great things. And so, again, I see ourselves competing at a high level. And again, what Wisconsin does, what Iowa does, what Ohio State, what Michigan, what Penn State, there's no reason why we can't do it. And that's our goal. We're going to do everything we can to get there.
So you and I grew up about 50 miles apart in the state of Iowa. My hometown, Manchester, your hometown, Waterloo. You're a couple years older than me, and your high school beat my high school. You were a senior. I was a sophomore. I was the statistician. I was not big enough really to play to play. You were the star wide receiver for Waterloo Columbus. You knocked us out in the first round and then went on to the state championship. The reason I bring it up is one we have some fun with. And I think the first time I ever introduced you, we were in Hutchinson, Minnesota at one of the Gopher road trips. And I sprung that on you live up in front of everybody. And you looked at me like, holy cow, what's this guy's problem? But we've talked about it. But I bring it up to ask you about, one, your Midwest upbringing, and two, as a guy who won a state championship as a high schooler, how did those two things formulate your competitive nature? Because you are a very competitive person, a quietly competitive person, though. I think people be surprised knowing how your demeanor is just to watch you. I think people be surprised because I see it, how competitive you are.
Yeah, well, first off, Mike, you grew up in Iowa like I did, obviously, as you just stated, and you could not ask for a better upbringing, right? I mean, how great was it growing up when you and I grew up in the state of Iowa? And, if you remember, the University of Iowa was not very successful in football. They weren't very successful in men's basketball and some of their other sports. And while you and I are growing up, Coach Fry is down at Iowa, and he's starting to flip it. You remember how they used to always play Nebraska every year at the start of the year, and they get beat 60-3?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it started to flip. And I was always intrigued by that. And I had an older brother who went to Iowa State. And remember Dwayne Crutchfield, the running back for Iowa State,
yes.
And Iowa State was having some success. And Johnny Orr and what he did at Iowa State with their basketball program. I mean, those teams were having national success. And I was just at that age where that stuff intrigued me and it interested me. And when I was at Columbus and I had a chance to play football, and I'm disappointed that you did not pad my stats, by the way, in that game as a statistician. I think we threw the ball 2 times a game, and I was a target both times. So I either caught it or dropped it. But I've just always been very competitive. And I say this being serious. I am a nerd. Look at me. I'm a very quiet person. I'm behind the scenes. That drives some people absolutely bonkers, but that's just how I am, because I feel like our department should be about our student athletes and our coaches. But I always tell our coaches and I tell our student athletes, make no mistake, you will not meet a more competitive person. I mean, I love to compete. I love to watch kids compete. I love to watch coaches compete. And again, right or wrong, there is no reason why we can't win here. And we have to talk about that. We have to talk about having success. And you can't back away. You can't shy away from that. And, Mike, we did a strategic plan here a couple of years ago. And I told my staff, I want something so simple and clear and easy, that at the time my 5th grade son would understand. And one of our very first statements we talk about is to win. And people are like, well, you're saying it. Yes, we're going to talk about winning. And what I learned at Columbus the year before, so we won in the 86 championship team. The year before, we were ranked number 1 in the state the whole year. We were one of the top teams in the state easily. Chris Kleiman, who's now the head coach at Kansas State, was our quarterback. He was a Division I player. We had great talent, and we lost in the semifinals. We came back the next year and basically lost all of our starters, and I think we lost maybe 2 of our first 3 or 4 games, and then we win, 8 or 9 in a row to win the state championship. But what that taught me was each year's different. You got to get off the ground and compete every time you compete, and you never know what happens. And I'll end with this. I remember when I got to Boise State, we had a women's golf coach, Nicole, and she was awesome, just an awesome coach. And our women's golf team was struggling, and she was just miserable. I mean, every time I talked to her, she was down, frustrated. And I said, well, let's talk about winning, because it's fun. When you win, you have fun. And they started to have some success. And I watched that whole attitude of that team and of that coach just flip. And they became a really good golf program and having great success. And she has since stepped down. She's doing a different job now. But I remember she came into my office about a year later, and she's like, my God, you're right. Winning is fun. It is fun, right? And I imagine your plane trip home from East Lansing the other night was pretty quiet.
Yep.
Could you imagine what that plane ride was back if we would have beat them?
A lot more fun, yeah.
Yep, a lot more fun. And so, again, we remind our coaches and our student athletes all the time, we want to compete at a high level. We want to do things the right way, academically, athletically, and socially, and we want to have fun. And a big part of having fun is winning. Remember being on the field after the win in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, how exciting people were, the fun, the excitement, the Outback Bowl, when our volleyball team goes to the Final Four in volleyball. Those things, they're fun, they're addicting, and that's what I want to be a part of. And that's what I learned at Columbus.
Yeah, very good. Waterloo, Columbus, a Waterloo, Columbus seller. Then on to Drake, and I know you've got like 2 minutes. I've kept you longer than I already promised. As a competitor, as a guy who played college football, does it ever get hard, or maybe you do offer input to particularly the football coach, right? I mean, you're a college football player. You're competitive. You see stuff. We all occasionally, I'm sure the coach gets frustrated. Do you ever just blurt something out and then have the coach say, hey, stay in your lane there, boss?
I hope not. I hope all of our coaches would tell you that I've never called a play. I've never coached a game in my life. My highlight in coaching is I was always the dugout dad when our kids were younger playing baseball and softball. I always wanted to be the dugout dad to line up the kids for batting practice or, batting order, because you're the most popular person in the dugout, right? Because they all want to bat. But, it's funny. PJ and I have this joke. I usually go talk to him in his office before home football games, just to check in with him and say hi. And I'll do the same thing on the road. I'll pop in the locker room, in the visiting locker room, just to check in on him and say hi and make sure he knows I'm thinking about him and how much we appreciate him, et cetera. And it was before one of our games, and I walked in there, we're talking for a few minutes, and I'm walking out the door, and I said, hey, boss, make sure you remember to run the ball. And it was a game where we ran the ball a lot, and then in the post-game press conference, he made a joke about how Coyle told me to run the ball. That was not me giving him any advice. I was just trying to be like, hey, just run the ball today or something like that, right? Because I know when you run the ball, it's a heck of a lot easier to control the clock and win the game. So he took my advice that day.
That's awesome. Well, hey, we appreciate it. I know you have a meeting to get to, and I've kept you, I think, about 10, 12, 15 minutes longer than I promised. So we all appreciate it. Thank you for being guest one on episode 2 of the podcast, and we'll look forward to seeing you in a road trip soon.
All right, Mike. Hey, we appreciate you, and we appreciate all of our fans who are supporting our student athletes and program. It makes a huge, huge difference. We're doing great things here. And again, a big thanks to you and everybody who supports our program.
That's Golden Gopher Athletic Director Mark Coyle. My thanks to him for spending so much time with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know I did. This has been the Go Gopher Podcast. It's brought to you by State Farm agent Tony Hoagland. Again, I'd invite you to subscribe to the Go Gopher Podcast, and we'll talk next week.